Late last week, the ACLU filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Education Department. The ACLU claims that recent changes made to Title IX by Education Secretary Betsy DeVos sharply limit educational institutions' obligations to respond to reports of sexual harassment and assault. Betsy DeVos opted to narrow the definition of sexual harassment, and schools will be required come later this summer to challenge evidence and to cross-examine students via a live hearing. I spoke about these changes earlier with Vanessa Reyna with the Orange County-based group Waymakers Victim Assistance. But Vanessa and I began by talking about sexual assault among the general public. It has been a real challenge for some local authorities to respond to rape victims amidst the orders to stay safer at home. Vanessa Reyna told me some counties have had to resort to giving them self-administered rape kits.
Fortunately, we are not one of the counties who are having self-administered rape kits. We've actually released and tried to educate our community to share that that's not the case here in Orange County. There is still access to having a rape kit done, and we've tried to tailor it to the best of our ability to keep it aligned with what the pre-COVID process was. That we've had to make some changes, again, to align with state, local, and federal guidelines of physical distancing. And due to that, we're still having law enforcement be around. They are classified first responders. They are, quote unquote essential, although most of us are essential folks in our day-to-day jobs and responsibilities. But really in trying to make it as easy of a process for the survivor, and also recognizing that they might feel overwhelmed having that many folks in one space, knowing what's going on with the pandemic and the virus, and the likelihood that it can contaminate the space or impact an additional impact that they might experience. So what we've done is we've maintained that process of having the forensic nurse examiner and law enforcement who will gather the report, and the forensic examiner who's collecting the evidence off the victim's body. And the victim advocate is available via phone. So again, we have our 24-hour hotline, and we've kind of created a process where we've created a video so that law enforcement is aware that we are sharing all the same information to the survivor, so that the forensic nurse examiner can play that for the survivor before that exam takes place, knowing kind of the lens and the role of the advocate, that they have that support person still available, and that they have access to resources after. It's not something where there is no follow-up and a safety plan or a care plan that's not available anymore. We are still there, and we're actually still providing an immediate response as soon as we receive that referral from the forensic nurse provider. We're following up that same day that it's received with that survivor in order to offer follow-up services. So the real main difference in our system here in Orange County is just the lack of the physical presence of the victim advocate, which, not to say that our role is bigger or smaller, but it is a critical role there, because it's the one position that's catered specifically for that survivor. So we wanted to ensure that we were there available, even if it wasn't in the capacity of our presence, our physical presence there and our preference, but that we were still there and accessible.
And Vanessa, I know that we're still relatively early in the course of this pandemic. It's been roughly 2 months now, so it may be somewhat too soon to tell. We have had folks on this program who've talked about concerns about a spike in domestic violence. Any sense of sexual assault and whether or not there has been an increase during recent weeks?
Right. Well, that's a great question, too, because I'm seeing it from a couple perspectives. I've been in this movement for 12 years, and in that I've seen just a lot of different cycles and the waves that come with that, and yearly cycles and over time. And definitely during the last 2 months, since we've started to really reinforce through the state the social distancing practices, we have seen a couple of, the first initial weeks were very quiet. And I don't attribute that to there being a decrease in sexual violence. I attribute it to the fact that there's a lack of confidential spaces to really reach out to find that support, whether it's using that 24-hour hotline or reaching out to a teacher that you're no longer seeing in person, confiding in a friend who then tells their parent and reports, just different means. And also if the person that's causing harm is within the same home, there might not be enough comfort or confidence in knowing that you're going to find, supportive resources. They might be looking at it from a perspective of, where am I going to go if I make this report? So it might be something where someone is in a position of surviving sexual trauma while surviving a pandemic. So we actually saw a decrease the first couple of weeks. A little thereafter, we actually have started to get back to our, it's hard to tell if it's been an increase or it's back to what would have been during this time, because, during this season, we do start to have an increase of reported cases or survivors reaching out for services due to, spring break or different, once the seasons change, so does the process or the expectations, I guess, of how many clients we serve. Typically, the warmer it is, the more vacations that take place, the more travel, and the more that kiddos are at home, it's when we experience a higher increase of volume in clients. And again, the last about 2 to 3 weeks, we've seen that. And we've actually seen a couple of cases in an increase where it's a stranger, which most of the times that's what we educate, what we're educated on, to look out for that stranger. Although most cases of sexual assault is someone in a position of trust, and more oftentimes than not, someone within the own home. And we've actually seen about a half and half in the last couple of weeks.
And Vanessa, you mentioned spring break as one of those times where you might see an increase in sexual assault. And I'd like to take that opportunity to talk about some recent news developments. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos announcing recently some changes in how sexual assault accusations will be handled on campus. Can you kind of walk us through what the changes, these won't be taking place for a couple of months, but what these might look like and what you and your colleagues are saying about these changes? Is it a move in the right direction?
What I can share about that is it was a very extensive document. It's 2,000 pages. So I'm in the early process of reviewing all of that. But just in my general scope of what I've been able to see and what I do know, I see that they've narrowed down the definition of sexual harassment. And with that, I think they've also required very specific guidelines for schools in terms of the responsibility to review these allegations, but looking at it from a perspective of knowing that they're really narrowing down what sexual harassment means and having institutions view those allegations and those reports through a very narrowed lens and through very specific frames might limit the outcome, and that sends a message to a lot of survivors. It really can create an intimidating factor for, for most folks who are impacted through this. It's college-age students, so you're looking at college, universities, and private campuses, where if they know that this is the sentiment, or they have heard that the process is you're going to report, but nothing's going to come of that, that might dissuade a lot of survivors from coming forward on campuses, which would unfortunately take us a step back when we've done so many steps forward when it comes to Title IX. In addition to that, they've also just made a couple of different changes in terms of making it very specific, the role and the responsibility of the institution. So they wanted to really, if the crime occurred on campus, if the crime occurred, at a campus event, then they're held responsible, but not looking at the fact that what if it was 2 students outside of the campus, or what if it was a student studying abroad? Those are factors that have been left out that still impact students, not just the survivor, but also those around if the person who allegedly committed this crime is still a student and actively there on campus. So there's so many different factors, and also just looking at it from the perspective that it is to be in effect on August 14th. And we don't know yet what to expect in terms of how campuses are going to operate, because we are still surviving this pandemic. So, the same way we're doing this interview virtually, I don't know if students are going to be placed in a position where they're trying to figure out campus housing, trying to figure out how to have access to their meals, how to accommodate and get used to virtual education. Those are all things that are still fairly new to us. So to now add a whole new 2,000-page document, I think that's it's a little overwhelming for, those who are not dealing with the trauma, but for someone who's also going through that sexual trauma experience, it can be very overwhelming.
Vanessa Reyna, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on all of this. We really appreciate your time, and we really appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.